Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Josh Osborne, and I'm the product manager for the CI Tools here at Central Innovation. And this is the weekly CI Tools webinar. There's a session where we look at stuff to do with the CI Tools. Sometimes we talk about new features, sometimes we talk about new tools or existing tools that you maybe don't know about or don't know well. And sometimes we cover our frequently asked questions or information about new updates and that sort of thing. If you have any questions as we go along today, please feel free to enter those in the chat panel as we go, and I'll answer those if I can while we're online, or I'll use them as the basis for a future webinar. This week, I couldn't think of anything else for us to cover, so I think what we will do is have a look at the quantities tool. We haven't done a webinar on that in a while, so I'm going to have a look at an introduction to using the quantities tool, why you might want to use it, and how to get started with using it. The quantities tool is is available to CI Tools Premium subscribers, or it's available as a selection in the CI Tools Basic subscription. It's not available to select customers in the select pack of tools, so if you are interested in the quantities tool, give it a try for 30 days and see if it does the kind of thing that you want, and if it does, then you can start up a CI Tools subscription to get hold of that. So first of all, what is the quantities tool? So you can probably guess by the name that the quantities tool is for quantity information. Specifically, what the quantities tool does, though, is that it will allow you to collect quantity information about your model as you go through the design process. So the tool is not designed as a replacement for a quantity surveyor or for anything like that. The tool is designed for you as the designer to be able to see what sort of the costing and quantities will be as you go through the project, and also so that when you make changes or variations in the project, you can get estimates on the quantities that are involved in the changes as you go as well. So it's to give you insights as you're going through the design process. It's not to take the place of someone actually producing a quantity survey at the end of the project or anything like that. So, excuse me. So with that in mind, the quantities tool will sit inside your ArchiCAD project, and you can essentially look at the quantities of what you have basically in real time, anytime as you're going through designing in your project. So the way that it works is that we'll go to our quantities tool here, and we will choose to have a look at the bill of quantities palette. And this will show us our bill of quantities, and then we'll also have a look at our quantity takeoff manager. Now, there's a couple of things to know about the quantity takeoff, and that is that there are two main things that we need to know about in here. That is the bill items, which you can see under the bill structure here, and the recipes, which you can see under recipes over here. These are the two main components that you need to know about with setting up quantities. And those are the main things you'll be working with when you set up quantities. So first of all, the bill item. So this is a list of the bill items. You can see I only have 2 of them at the moment. And essentially, this is a list of all of the things that you want to measure in your project. So the quantities tool doesn't measure anything by default. It doesn't do any measurements by itself. It measures what you tell it to measure. And so the bill structure here is where you tell it what things you want to be able to measure. So you will go through, in this case, I have set up 2 bill items called wall surf 1 and 2. They're measuring the area of the wall surfaces of different types. And we can see I have a rate applied per square meter here. This is 1.5 and this is 1.8. If the only thing that you're interested in getting out of the tool is actual quantities rather than a pricing estimate, you can just leave the rate at 1 for everything there and essentially ignore that part. But that's what we're doing there. We're just adding a rate multiplier there. But the main point is having the actual bill item here. So you can go through and build up a whole lot of these. Once you have all of the bill items set up in your project, the next thing that you do is you use the recipes to tell the quantities tool how to generate the value to show in each bill item. So if we click over on recipes, you'll see that this opens out and we can see a list of recipes here. We've only got one at the moment called walls. And if I select that, you can see what we've got going on here. So first of all, at the very top, we are defining what will make this recipe happen. So in this case, this recipe runs whenever the element type is a wall. If you're familiar with expressions in ArchiCAD already, this will probably look familiar to you. It's essentially the expression structure in here. So we are saying that the type of the element is wall. If that's the case, then run this, excuse me, run this recipe. So this is our sort of our gatekeeper or our filter to choose what kind of elements we want to be included in this recipe. And then the items down here are the names of the bill items and then the recipe that generates into them. So if I select wall surf 1, you can see here that we have an additional when. So this is our next filter. So if anything's a wall, then these recipes will run. And then when this recipe runs, if anything is, so if the wall's outside finish, so the surface on the outside of the wall, if it is using the surface brick red, then run this recipe. And on wall surf 2, if the finish outside is using the surface brick brown, then this recipe will be run. At the moment, they are both running the same actual recipe formula. So the quantity is just the surface outside. However, we had the rates set at 2 different numbers, as you remember. One was 1.5, one was 1.8. So it will generate the same quantities, but different costs for both of those two. So we have them separated out like that because we want to assign different rates to different surface types, which you probably will want to do. So we can go through here and build up our list of recipes as we go, or we can import or just use from our template a list of recipes that you've already built. From then on, we can then use the bill of quantities palette that we have here to see the actual quantities involved in our project. I'm going to run a calculate on this and you'll see that we get some values out. This doesn't mean much to us at the moment because we don't really know how many walls we have and that sort of thing, but you can see what it is doing here. So wall surface 1, the quantity is 11.47 square meters. We've got a rate of 1.5 square meters, and so the cost is 17.2. Wall surface 2, which was a different kind of brick surface, if you remember, the quantity is quite similar. It's 11.1. The rate on this, however, is 1.8, so our final cost is 20 for that value. So you can see it's just generating it as we go. And if we make changes to anything, we just hit the calculate button again and it will regenerate this list. We can also export this list, which you may want to do at certain points. Maybe you don't have the costs in the quantities tool, but you do have them in, say, an Excel spreadsheet or something like that. You can use the export button here to export a CSV file and then import that into Excel and assign the costs and then generate those here. But the idea of the tool is to be able to see all of it inside of ArchiCAD as you go without you having to chop around into different applications and that sort of thing. So I'm just going to switch projects over to a different project that we use for our quantities testing here so that you can see a little bit of what it actually will do. So I've got a bunch of test elements placed down here. It looks a little bit strange just because we want to get different values out of things to see how it works, but this will give us a good example of how the tool works. So I'm going to open up my quantities tool again. we're going to say manage quantity takeoff this time. So this is the palette that we opened up before. And you can see in this one, we have quite a lot larger of a build structure. So this is grouped by element type. You can group by anything at all you want. It doesn't matter how you organize your build structure. This just made sense for us because this is what we were testing for at the time. So this is grouped by element, but yeah, it could be grouped by area of the building or phase of the project or anything like that. And then you create your build items inside them. You can also nest build items as well. So for instance, if I'm not sure if I have any nested ones in here. I think there's some in general actually. Yeah, there we go. So we've got some subfolders which you can do as well. And when we look at the actual schedule, you'll see that those are all enumerated by their index numbers here. So 1.15.3, for instance, will be showing against material volume. But this is fundamentally the same as what we saw before. So we have a build structure that we've set up here, and then we have our recipes. And you can see we have quite a few more recipes here. So I can go in and select one of these. Let's go with general. So the recipe called general, it has a filter saying that this will run when the element is a beam, column, door, fill, lamp, mesh, morph, etc. I won't read out all of those, but that is what it is running on. So effectively it's saying this is a general recipe that can be run on any type of element, or almost any type of element. And then below that we have a bunch of these general bill items that have recipes assigned to them. So for instance, we have the length. And you can see that this just runs all the time. So we've got no filter here, and it will just show us the length of the element. Most of these are pretty straightforward. This one here, the type. So we are saying that the element type is a wall and the quantity is set to 1. Effectively what this means is that this field will just increment by 1 each time it counts a new one of these. So what this will actually do in the context of this project is that it will give us a list of how many walls there are in the project. So if you ever want, rather than a quantity based on, like the area or the volume or something like that, if you just want a count of the amount of items, you can just set the quantity to 1 without any calculation on it, and that will give you the amount of that thing. The rest of these are pretty straightforward. Element height, element perimeter, etc. We've got a bunch more count items here. So element level, name. If the name contains chair, then increment 1. So this will give us a list of all of the chairs in the project, etc. Now we've got a couple more advanced ones here, and this is this type of thing that you'll probably want to be getting into if you are looking at using the quantities tool to get out numbers for things like the materials that you're using. So we've got material volume here. This one again doesn't have any filter on it, so it's just always running. And what it's doing is it is looking at the material of the element. So that is to say the building material. Whenever it says material, what it means is building material. And it is looking specifically for the building material masonry brick facing. And then we've got a dot volume here. So it's going to, the quantity value that this is going to output is the volume of material that is masonry brick facing. So it won't be the volume of, say, an entire wall. It'll be the volume of the wall that is using that building material. So we'll get an accurate value out of how much of that type of building material that we're using, rather than the overall volume of the wall and that sort of thing. So this is where you can get into finding out the actual real values of the amount of materials that you're using. So we've got a couple more like that where the same thing happens. This one's doing the thickness, this one's doing the skins. We've got a finish area, which is listing the finish when the surface, the surface is what they're called. I always forget if it's called a surface or a material, because it used to be called that. So we're looking for paint dark grey for the surface, and the rest of these are doing pretty similar things. So you can get an idea of the type of thing that we're doing here. If the phase is existing, increment by 1. if it's on this layer, increment by 1, and if the layer is visible. So we're getting a bunch of count values coming out of there as well. And because this is running on general, this will count for most of the elements that we have in the project. So that's the general recipe. And then we have recipes that are specific to certain element types. So for instance, we can go to wall here, and you'll see that we have all of our wall build items here. So running through from 4.1 regular wall type, you can see that what we're looking at here is anything where the shape of the wall is regular. So that's as opposed to a custom shaped wall. If the wall shape is regular, then increment the count by 1. So this is going to give us a count of how many regularly shaped walls there are in the project. Then we have a bunch more just collecting a certain value out of the item, and then a couple more counts at the bottom here. And we can go through all of our other fields and see what's going on here as well. So I'm just going to close that, and then we'll open up our takeoff palette. Nope, sorry, not our takeoff palette. We'll open our bill of quantities palette. So that's what we looked at before. So now that we have a project with actual decent amounts of elements in it and plenty of recipes that are running, we can calculate. We can choose to either calculate for the entire project or for selection. So this will be good for if you're doing variations. You'll be able to select just a certain chunk of the building, calculate for that, and then select a different chunk and calculate there and see the differences. For this one, we're going to run on the entire project. Now, one thing I will warn you here is that doing a calculation, especially when you have a large amount of recipes like I have here, does take time. It won't take a very long time. It will take probably about 15 to 20 seconds, I would say. If you have a very large project, that will get bigger. And if you have a very large amount of recipes, that will get bigger as well. But it does take ArchiCAD some time to actually go through the project and collect up all of that data and then run the calculations. So just be aware that you're not going to be getting the values here updated in real time, because if we did that, it would just kill ArchiCAD. You wouldn't be able to use it anymore. So you do have to press the calculate button each time. And when you do, so I've just clicked it there, it will take a little while for it to generate the values. So yeah, so about maybe 4 seconds on this machine. On my old machine, it took about 15 seconds. So that will depend on how fast your hardware is as well, but it's not too large of an amount of time. It's not go and make a cup of coffee time. It's more check and see if you have any messages on your phone amount of time. But here we can see the actual schedule. We've got some decent amount of values showing on here this time. So we can go through and look at what we've got going on here. So everything is ordered by its key at the moment. So we're starting with 1, which was the general field. And so this will show off all of those general values that we saw. So for instance, you can see the lengths, the surfaces, the volume, and that sort of thing. We've got type here. If we remember, we had type set to wall, I think. So it's saying that there are 13 walls in the project. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. These are walls here, 9, 10. 11, I think that might be about right. 12, that might be a wall there. 13, yeah, that seems right. So that's counting our amount of walls. Then we go back to a couple of measured values here. We don't have any rates entered in any of these, so you can see they are all one of the thing that they are. So we're not doing any additional calculation there. We're just getting the numbers out basically. So we can go through and we can see the rest of those. We also had a couple of items that were filtered. I think this one here, the material volume and the material area, were the ones that we were calculating based on specific building materials. So we're getting quantities out. So the total volume is 278.97, but the material volume is just the amount of that one material, which I think was masonry brick or something like that, which is in fact only 7, I think probably cubic meters by the look of it. And then the area of that is 101 as opposed to 495. So it's just the area and volume that meet the criteria that we gave it for those ones. So you can go through and see all of these. We'll get down into the further categories here as well. So because we have quite a few items in here, most of them have some sort of value happening here. So we can go through and see all of what's going on there. And if we want to export, we can do that as well. And if we make changes to anything, we can just hit the calculate button, and it will again take about actually that was much faster, a couple of seconds, and update all of our fields there. And then if you want to go through and make a selection, switch to current selection and hit calculate again, we'll see the same values, but just for the selection instead now. So you can quite easily switch around between what you're looking at and then just jump back to entire project when you need to as well. Now the last thing that I want to have a look at with the quantities tool is the palette, which I accidentally opened earlier. Quantity takeoff palette. I'm just going to quickly check and see if we've got any questions before I finish up with this part here. All right, looks like no questions at this stage. So the quantities info palette here is just a floating palette that you can have. You may recognize it. It's what the metadata tool is essentially based on. So if you've used that at all, this will look quite familiar. If I select an element here, so I'll select this wall, you'll be able to see the information about it. And these bottom two panels here are essentially what the metadata tool is. So it's showing you the property data and the classification data. You can make changes to it in real time. You can select and filter based on that, and do the same with the classifications. I showed this, I think, a couple of weeks ago during this webinar. So if you were there for that one, this will look familiar to you. But the difference here is that we have quantity info up at the top. And this is a good way for when you are working on making your recipes, but checking that it's doing what you think that it's going to do. Because otherwise it's kind of a black box. When you're working in here, you have to go through and type in these sort of arcane element.type equals and that sort of thing. You can never 100% tell that it's actually going to do what it says it's going to do. And so if you want to check it as you go, the palette here is a good way of checking in on that. So with our wall selected, you can see up at the top here, it says recipes, and we've got general and wall, and these are showing in italics. So what this means is that these two here are recipes that are being applied to this element because it fits the criteria for them. So they meet the when here. So the general includes element.type of wall. So this is included. So that's why it's showing wall in italics there. And if we go to wall, element.type is wall. That's why that shows there. But then if we go to units, that's only showing beams where the assembly ID contains frame. And so this is not available there. If you want to force a recipe to run on it, even though the when doesn't apply, you can do that. You can hit the plus button here and come in and say, actually, I do want, what was it that we had? I can't remember what it was. Let's go beam. Hit OK. You can see beam shows there as well. It's not in italics, so that means it's manually being added to this element. So this element will now generate schedules using the beam recipe as well, even though the beam recipe doesn't apply to it. So element.type equals beam, that doesn't apply, but we're going to force it to run anyway. It looks like all of these calculations are based on beam values anyway, so we'll not get anything out of it. So I can jump into here, go current selection and calculate that, and we'll see beam is item 6. We get no values for item 6 because none of them will produce any number, so we don't see anything at all there. But you can force things that way. You will quite often, maybe you might have a general one that you only want some of the time, so you could set general for the add when, set it to never add, and then just only show it on manually selected elements, and you can go through and manually choose the elements that you want it to run on or something like that. That would be a good way of using that. But yeah, this is a good way of just checking that your recipe is set up the way that you expect it to. So you can, for instance, select a wall here. You can see that this one's been assigned dummy, and it's also picked up general and wall automatically. The slab over here has been assigned dummy also, and has general and slab, roof and general, etc. So it will do pretty much what you expect it to do in that regard. But if you are setting up, oops, that's the wrong button. If you are setting up the whens for your recipes, this is a good way of checking that whether it will work or not, is put that in there, then go and select an element that it should work on, and if it shows up in italics at the top, then you've done it right, and if not, then you haven't. So that is a very brief introduction to the quantities tool. The other big part of the quantities tool that you'll probably want to know is that when you are working with the recipes here, so if I go and select one of these, you'll see obviously for the quantity we're using wall.surface outside. You may be thinking to yourself, do I have to somehow memorize all of these values so that I know what to pick up here? The answer is no. If you go to the knowledge base, so just head over to my CI and go to the, I think it's called the help center there. Go to the CI tools section and then go to quantities, and there's a full index of every single available value for here, so you can go through and find the ones that you want. It's ordered by element type in there, so if you're looking for things to do with walls, look up the walls page. It will show you a list of all of the available wall calculations that you can do, basically. So that will help you build up your recipes that way. Also, while we're in the quantities manager as well, the thing I forgot to show you was that we also have an import and export button here as well. So if you work on making a bunch of recipes in a project and you want to get that out to a different project, or you just want to send them out so that you can put them in your template or something like that, you can do that using the import and export commands here in the quantity takeoff manager as well. All right. That is all from me for today. But thanks for your time, everyone. Okay. We've got a question about taking the quantities from two specific select objects here. I'm not quite sure what exactly that you want to do. Generally, the quantities for objects will not work in the way that you expect them to do, because objects in ArchiCAD in almost all cases don't have building materials, which is the main way that you would be generating a quantity schedule. So if you have, for instance, a wall frame object placed somewhere, it won't have building materials in those wall frames. So if you schedule the amount of timber that is in a wall frame object, for instance, it will just say 0 because it doesn't have any. So no, you won't be able to do anything like that. If you're wanting to get specific parameters out of objects, there is a way to do that. That's documented in the knowledge base. There's a way to pull out specific parameters. So if you know the parameter that matches the quantity in one of those two objects, I don't think we have that in either of those, but if you do have an object that has that, you could pull that out. But in general, most objects in ArchiCAD don't have building materials. There's a few exceptions, like the our coverings tool. You may remember a couple of months ago we made a big upgrade to it, and that was to make it actually have building materials, which was quite a big change. And it's quite unusual for an object to have those, but you will find that in 99% of cases, any objects that you're using, they don't have building materials in them. It's just not how they are usually designed. All right, thanks for attending, everyone. Next week, I don't know what we'll be covering yet, so tune in then to see what we're looking at. But if you have any suggestions, please send them through to nz.support centralinnovation.com. That would be great if you could give me some sort of ideas of what you might like to see, because I'm running out of them. But otherwise, I will catch you at the next one. Thanks for your time today.